Now this guy is a real serious one. Don't be fooled by the dadu and fun. I'm not migrating. A spurned ship's documentation.
Watch his multimedia.
Enemy, I'm done.
Well, it's been such a wonderful day of readings, talks, critical thoughts, amazing arcs of discussion and dialogue, where so many of us have kind of been influenced in terms of the written word and in the form of poetry, wonderful creative voices. I just wanted to say again, thank you so much, Usha, for your invitation and the collective's invitation to be here and to be able to contribute. And also thank you to Harman and to Ravi Agela and to Sashant for helping me, and Ravi Shankar over there for helping me put this up so that you could actually appreciate the photographic multimedia presentation that I'm going to be presenting. So I think what I'll do is I'll just give you a little bit of a historical kind of context as to why I wrote Dream Arteries. Dream Arteries is a book of poems. It's in 3 sections. 2014 marked an important community centenary in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. That centenary was the 100th anniversary of the SS Komagata Maru's arrival, and the ship, that's the ship that arrived in Vancouver in May of 1914. And the reason why it's important to the community, and specifically there's a really large South Asian community in BC. We're about 300,000 people, and it's been there since 1897. So the reason why it's critically important is in 1914, this ship arrived with 376 passengers of South Asian descent. They were specifically Punjabis and specifically Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus who arrived in Vancouver. Up until 1914, the Canadian government and the government of British Columbia had enacted all of this legislation that essentially restricted both South Asians and Asians from voting, from arriving in Vancouver and in Canada, and they were really specifically only ever invited to be in BC as a labor force and as a temporary labor force. But like so many migration histories, whatever the intent of the imperial government was completely different from the intent of the community that arrived. And like many movements of civil rights, we had to work at undoing all of those unjust laws. So this ship sat in Vancouver for about 2.5 months. It was denied process, it was denied food, they were starved in the harbor, it was surveilled to no end. And actually the beautiful pictures that you see today is the result of a massive amount of surveillance that the Punjabi community underwent at that time. The number of people that were living in Vancouver that were of Punjabi descent were about 3,000 to 4,000. So if you consider that, 4,000 people in a small community in a big city, and the level of surveillance was almost astronomical. There were 3 or 4 different governments that were surveilling. There was the government of BC, the Canadian government, the British Home Office, and also the Indian colonial government in India. So, and some of the immigration inspectors were actually intelligence officers for all 4 of those governments. So they were receiving paychecks from all 4 governments. And that is a bit of history that you don't know unless you open up some historical information, you check the archives, and this book is really kind of focused on really sourcing that archive and really considering what do you do with a body of information and public record. So I decided to write some poetry about it. So what I decided to do was actually, because it's poetry, and I'm not trying to reproduce another history, that's kind of a parallel to the documentation, I decided to anthropomorphize the ship. So in the poetry, the ship becomes a person, and the ship becomes, I guess it moves back and forth between genders, so it's an androgynous identity. And the reason why I did that is because I'm really interested in explorative poetics and contemporary poetics, and thinking and considering what Kiki Dalawala said this morning about surrealism and the role of the avant-garde. That's where I situate myself, and that's the work that I do. I definitely began from lyrical-based poetry, but that's where my practice is now. So with this ship, an interesting story about the ship is that it was built in Scotland. It was owned by 2 German companies before it became a Japanese-owned company ship. It was owned by the Hansa Line and the Hamburg America Line. So from 1890 to about 1907, it was owned by 2 major global packaging companies that also did some business on the side, bringing European immigrants to the New World. So this same ship that had Punjabis on it 20 years before brought thousands of immigrants that were fleeing the unjust conditions of their communities in Europe to places like Ellis Island, to places like Montreal, and then to Halifax, Piers 1 and 2. So this poetry kind of explores that, and explores the kind of the context in those different places. If I have time, I also might kind of break out of this section and just kind of give you a couple of more poems that's in the other areas of the book. I'm just going to run through the imagery while I read. A ship's story. I was born in the yards of Scotstoun shipyard, launched into the Clyde River and given a German name. The straight funnel of my body threaded skyward by taut cables webbing heaven bound. My body a glory of black steel. I moved at the fastest pace then. I am old now, and my sojourn near the end. For those who voyage with me and with my new master, he has purchased a second life for me. The old world exhausted me. I had already made more than 92 crossings between 2 worlds. In the new world, my usefulness was extinguished. Tomorrow I will become the parts of the sun, feeding the salt water, the debris that was my body. Each part of me I will offer to those who are unloved. In hope, my wards will be made complete, whole for a new life, while my life escapes me. If you would to admire me then do so when I was beautiful and strong. Do so when my name was young. Do so even now as I return the unloved, delivering them to the rifles, the lapis, and jails of Britain's Bharat. Dies Stoic Haken. This stubborn hook. We move backward against the dock on the high side, and our destination, my new life. Excuse me for a second. We move backward against the clock on the high tide, our destination, my new life. On the quiet waters of the Elbe, I understand now my body will carry the world. The rivers swallow me whole into commerce. We arrive as the day passes into evening, the port city's hand before me, a sepal of fingers close in, as my guide threads me through this bulbous foci of business, waterways thick with human capital. The port opens up to me, the wharf and each berth a perfection of design. My body slowly eases into my transient home. My nautical journey just now beginning. Those looking for respite will be my friend. I will carry each burden for tomorrow and the days after. 10 anonymous journeys. Coal clouds and gulls hang steady in the wind. Songs, scuffles, shuffles, screams, receipts, paper, ways of me. Dream arteries surge seaward, pistons beat, Engines screech, a cacophonous wind thunders. Barnacle, black hull slice and sluice out through the streaming Scheldt from Antwerp. The port delivers the coal and cargo. Erosions ripple over memory, slip the border lost in the rip of tide. They feed the loss. My body brims and bleeds into the thick air against the Atlantic. Sisters, brothers, cousins, and great ancestors pass in quiet. Masters Schmidt and Thales eye the violence in the waters. The flap-flap wind shifts a pattern, the deep distance, the long droning notes of my lungs. We curl into the confluence of the Labrador, breaking through contrarian waves. My hulled hands crash against the tide. To the unloved I will offer a part of me, in hope my wards will be made complete for another life, while my indentured life escapes me. Admire me then. Do so when this beauty subsides, when my name ages. Do so when I transmute and shift my name and become the SS Komagata Maru. This guy here, his name is Gurdit Singh. He was a Singaporean Sikh. Basically, he was one of these very mischievous modern Sikh men who wanted to challenge all of the laws, the exclusionary laws of Canada, by chartering the ship in Hong Kong. At the same time, he was a businessman. And so he was trying to make some money, but also challenge the laws at the same time. So it's kind of funny that way. The redness of things. 6 hands with scarlet fingers, dusk. Shape shifts turning crimson at night. A martyr chooses the dark path to the gallows, sanguinary and precise. The horizon steeped in a rust-filled sunset seeps into the quiet waters. Today will be yesterday and the world will be tomorrow, and the future unfolds without my hand. The hull now dusted with an orange swath of pocked skin, scab flakes trail in the cliffed ridges of the after wave. Subedar, subaltern. Deep within my body, a yellow tongue licks the wall, the floor, the beds, and the cramped benches, and moves the unloved to slumber each day. Deep within my body, a baby sniffles and drinking the nutrition out of her mother. Deep within my body, a young boy wonders. His mother holds his hand tightly and weeps. Deep within my body, Forges sing dreams of an ocean and scaling mountains. Deep within my body, a doctor coughs, seeing that his oath will mean nothing here. His educated fears seeking safety on all sides. Deep within my body, men become darkness itself. Their smiles suffocate on barren stomachs. In the darkness where no one sleeps, fear and ignorance consume each other, and madness settles in to sleep and love. That's an image of the Komagata Maru, and that's the HMSCS Rainbow. So in July 1914, the government had finally won a court case, a Supreme Court case in Canada, to force the ship out of Canadian waters. And they were also given the power to use military force if necessary. So this is the last kind of image that you'll see of Komagata Maru during that time. These are all the gentlemen that were on the ship. And it's interesting because they were all previous military officers of the British Imperial Armed Forces. So they spent many years kind of both in waging war, unfortunately for the British, and also thinking that they could travel wherever within the British Empire because they were officers of the Crown. So these are some archival images. This is the first day that they arrived, and all of them were dressed as well as they could in the Victorian outfits. This gentleman is dancing on the plank, and they were all thinking that they'd be disembarking. And so these images capture just like the positive kind of almost joy of considering the idea of making a new life in British Columbia. And that's the ship leaving. And as you can see, this documentation is so rich, so beautiful, but the irony is it was surveillance. The lives of these people were affected when they got back to India. They landed in Bajbaj, which is near Calcutta, and they were attacked by British-Irish Fusiliers that was stationed in Bajbaj with the authority of the governor of the state. 20 people died. Hundreds of people were repatriated back to incarceration in their villages in Punjab, and a number of them were actually sent to the penal colonies in the Maldives during the rest of the war, and spent about 20 years in incarceration for this. So this is the kind of, when I thought about how I would actually approach writing this, one would think there's so much to write about. And specifically, the form of poetry. Why poetry? Well, the poetry actually in poetic form lends itself in one way to do this, and that is to create almost dream narratives. So in terms of actually condensing time, I was able to condense a number of different decades into a collection of poems. And also anthropomorphizing the ship itself allowed it to have a longer life than just as the Komagata Maru. So it expands to the whole theme of world migration and classification, who gets termed to be a legitimate immigrant, who is considered an illegal immigrant, who is considered a refugee, who is classified as a refugee, who is classified as potentially a terrorist. Which is a good segue to talk about this gentleman. This is Mewa Singh. He was a mill worker in Vancouver. Definitely part of the community. Was not a community leader, very quiet man, and he was definitely part of a community of activist workers that were part of the West Coast, movement to unseat the British in India, and that movement was called the Ghadar Party. And it was established on the west coast of the U.S. in Stockton, in California, and as well as in British Columbia. There were a number of high-profile leaders of that movement. But I focus on Mewa Singh because he did one thing that I thought was kind of interesting. He actually took it upon himself to assassinate one of the immigration officers. And the immigration officer was Inspector William Hopkinson, who was an Anglo-Indian from Calcutta, was part of the Calcutta police, spoke a number of Indian languages, but he was basically assigned to Vancouver and was on the pay of 4 governments purely to surveil the Punjabi community in Vancouver. And this was at the dawn of the whole independence movement in India. And so a lot of the connections to Vancouver and to the revolutionary movements in India, and especially the early part, has a connection, has these deep connections. But there was a lot of violence that took place during the time of the Komagata Maru and right afterwards. And William Hopkinson had hired a number of informants to create a lot of havoc in the community, and he arranged to assassinate one of the Gyanis in the Gurdwara at that time. So 2 or 3 people who were religious leaders in the temple itself were killed by one of his informants. So this is why this individual came forward to do what he did. Now, I'm not sanctioning what he did, but I think in that moment, he did what he did thinking he did the right thing. So he assassinated the person who was the architect. But at the same time, he was then tried and found guilty, and he was hung in jail in Westminster, which is a city suburb of Vancouver. So the interesting thing is this guy was a very silent individual, but at his court testimony, there's 12 pages of testimony, and he speaks so eloquently about the context as to why he did the things that he did. And so I was kind of inspired and informed by that and the kind of person that he probably was, as opposed to what people presented.